Hi, thanks for coming to this session, Baskets Two Pallets. It's about scaling up from direct channels into more wholesale-oriented selling. My name is Matt LeRoux. I work for Cooperative Extension in Tompkins County, New York. That's where Ithaca is. And I'm substituting for Violet Stone, who works for Cornell Small Farms program. But don't worry, I'm also pretty familiar with this material. But I am subbing in, so bear with me if I seem disoriented at some point. I wanted to sort of poll the room just to get an idea of why you came to this session. So I wanted to find out how many of you are growing vegetables? And then are there other things in the room? Like, is anyone looking to wholesale meat? Is that why you came? Okay. And dairy? All right, so we're really a meat and veggies room. Did I miss something? Mushrooms? I'll lump them with veggies for the sake of argument, but yeah. All right, and presumably, how many of you are doing farmers markets and CSAs now? And then how about some limited wholesaling, wholesale to restaurants and such? Okay, that helps me understand who came and what you're looking to do. And again, really the whole idea, it's right there in the title, Baskets to Pallets, is just about moving up into wholesale. So I'm going to use Violet's slides to cover this material, but I also sprinkled in a few of mine because I did some work on this subject from a research perspective for the past few years, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Violet's goals for this session were to have you understand the nature of these larger scale wholesale buyers, and mind you that when it comes to something like restaurants, we can still be talking about single cases of products, so it's not always pallets literally. And I also wanted to mention that she's going to have a much more extensive training, a longer version training. This is really kind of a teaser to see if you want to go to this other training. So that'll be coming up January 29th and 30th in Lowville, and you can register by contacting Violet or visiting the Small Farms website. And if you want me to put this slide up again at the end, just let me know and I'll throw it back up at the end. So that's really going to cover a large scale of topics about moving to wholesale, and it's a good presentation. All right, so this is my slide. This refers to the work that I started a number of years ago. I was originally hired with Extension under a grant to encourage more direct marketing farms who were the sort of veterans of the Ithaca farmers market who had been there a long time to think about maybe looking at wholesale and maybe actually moving out of the farmers market and creating some vacancies for some of our newer farmers to step in. So when I was charged with, convince more experienced farms to move out of direct marketing, for me, it raised the question, well, is that actually good advice? I mean, my understanding has always been that farmers markets are more profitable for farms. That's why they're in them. You cut out the so-called middleman, which would be the distributor, so you can keep more of the final value of the product and so on. And so before I wanted to encourage farms to move to wholesale and get out of direct markets, I wanted to understand economically if that's a good choice for them. So I came up with something called market channel assessment, and that was to evaluate the relative performance of different market channels for, in essence, profitability, to see if this is going to be good advice. And I learned a lot. I worked with 4 case study farms initially, and literally worked on their farms and heard their perspective on how they evaluate the different market channels that they use, and I'm going to reflect what I learned from them in this slide, hopefully in a slightly amusing way. So one farmer says to the other, there's all these opportunities out there, especially when you come to a conference like this. You go and you hear a panel of farmers, and one farm they're invited to speak on the panel because they're having this wild success in one channel, right? Whether it's farmers markets or CSA or whatever they're doing. They're just killing it. And so they come and they speak on the panel, and you leave like your heart's pounding and you're going to go do this now, right? So this is what's happening here. Joe, if you bring your vegetables to the farmer's market, the prices are so high, you could sell $500 worth per hour. Joe hears this comment, says, that's great, I'm going to go join that farmer's market, and he takes off. He doesn't listen to all the comments that this guy has to say about it. So first of all, it costs $300 a day to sell at this market. That's obviously, just to be funny. Markets don't really cost that much, but they do have costs involved, so he didn't hear this point. Okay, it's only for 1 hour a week, so thanks, Dennis. It's good, right? Yeah, so the opportunity to earn in this channel is actually severely limited because it's only 1 hour and it's cost $300 to be there. And if it rains, nobody shows up. All right, so if there's rain, there's no customers at all, you're not going to make anything, you're still going to spend your $300. And it takes 12 hours of labor to prepare and drive there and set up. So what you hear when you're evaluating wholesale opportunities, what you hear are actually these 6 factors that come together to influence the performance of a channel. And so as you look at moving out of direct marketing, you're going to want to evaluate, 1, the channels that you're in, and 2, the channels that you have the opportunity in. You're going to evaluate them for their performance. And I'm thinking about performance as being multiple factors. So, like when you choose a certain veggie to grow, when you choose one single carrot, like let's say bolero, you choose that carrot based on how well it grows in your soil at your place, right? That's one factor. Maybe germination rate, and then maybe storage, but also flavor. So if there was a carrot that could last 2 years in storage, but it tasted like garbage, that would be 2 factors coming together for your decision, right? So you're going to look at channels the same way as you choose, breeds of livestock and varieties of vegetable. Those factors are reflected in these comments that this guy makes. So one is the prices that you receive and what they imply about profit. High prices in a channel do not automatically mean high profit in a channel, right? Because if your costs are higher in that channel, you're not actually profiting more, even though you're grossing more. So price and profit and the implications there are a single factor. And then there are the associated costs. So every channel that you use has an associated cost. Farmers markets have membership and daily selling fees. CSAs have off-season time spent selling the shares, maybe printing costs. And then wholesale involves boxes and bags and cases that you buy and then you send them in the supply chain and you don't get them back. So that's a cost of that channel and perhaps delivery cost. Sales volume is the amount of product that you can sell in a given period of time. I'm going to really focus my comments on vegetables today, and when it comes to vegetables being so perishable, I'm going to look at 1 week's time. So how good is that channel in the sense of how many pounds and dollars worth of produce does it demand in 1 week's time? Okay, labor requirements are the amount of specific marketing labor that you have to put into that channel. For vegetables, I consider everything, that, including the harvest labor, to be marketing labor. So when you decide to go out and harvest for that restaurant or for that farmer's market, you've begun your marketing, right? Because production's over. If farming were summed up in 2 steps, it would be production and marketing. So production ends on the day that you go out and start pulling the vegetables off the plant, all the way through until it's sold to the customer, whether that's driving a truck to the restaurant or the loading dock, or it's going to the farmer's market. And then there are the risks. So every channel that you use has its own specific risks. What's a risk of farmers markets? Weather.
Waste. Competition.
Competition, yeah. And I think I heard something else, but
Waste.
Oh, waste, the unsold product.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah, okay. So those are some risks. And then when it comes to wholesaling, let's say to distributors, grocery stores, and restaurants, can you think of what some of the risks would be? They don't buy it. That is the one that comes to my mind right away. I call it buyer back out. I don't know if there's an industry term for it. But anybody in here ever backed a pickup truck up to a loading dock and then been told we're not buying it? Yeah. Yeah, it happens. It's very, very real, even if they like you. Well, we just brought in a whole bunch of cases from somewhere else. We don't need that. We don't want it. Yeah, buyer back out is a risk. Non-payment is a risk.
What about less marketing? Like, since everyone's at the farmers markets, they're seeing your product. If you sell to a restaurant, they don't really know where it's coming from.
And as a risk,
Yeah.
I'd say it's probably reflected maybe more in associated costs and labor in the sense that you have to provide the marketing and the visibility.
I'm just saying, okay, yeah, people are eating your product and they don't actually know they're coming from you.
And when they eat it at a restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting to express as a risk. It's something that, yeah, I've had conversations with farmers through the years about that.
Do you have a prerequisite, like restaurants to like advertise that it's your
Right,
product?
that would be, a farm-by-farm basis. On the one hand, if you're receiving your case price and the product's moving, what do you care about? What would they do with it afterwards? On the other hand, you may very well, especially if you have a CSA or some other channel that you want to be known to consumers through, then you'd be like, hey, I want my name on the menu. Yeah, what were you going to say?
And I also have had the experience where I'm in a restaurant the day before I deliver and see our name on the menu.
Yeah.
So people are eating not our food.
Thinking it's yours. Yeah, there's actually quite a bit of that going on. Police those menus. Yeah.
When you say payment as a risk, you just mean timeliness or you mean non-payment?
Both. Yeah, certainly both exist. I think, well, I don't want to get any rocks thrown at me, but I think restaurants tend to be the sort of riskiest in terms of actually getting paid. I know some farms that have had to follow up very severely to get paid. So there's 5 factors there that I would recommend that you evaluate new opportunities by. And then what I really learned from those farms that was so interesting to me, especially with a background in economics and being so profit-focused as an economist, is that lifestyle preference is the trump card. And what that means is if you enjoy doing something, even if it's perhaps lower profit, it's a good channel, right? I mean, you got into small-scale agriculture for the love of your work. And so if you identify channels that perform pretty well and you love doing it, that's a really good channel for you. If you identify a very high-profiting, high-grossing channel that's stressful and it makes you miserable and angry, that's not sustainable, right? So I'm calling it the trump card, and of course I was calling that long before the last election. And so it's kind of ruined my whole phrase, but it is. It's the decision-making that just stomps out on top of all the others. And I can just give you one short example. A farm that I started working with back then and continue to work with, they were wholesaling to distributors, and they said, we know that it's our top profiting channel, but it's so stressful, the distributor calls all the shots, I'm always angry, and so we just dropped them. And that's a reality, and it's a very good one. It's a good way to be sustainable. So I just wanted to introduce this sort of decision-making matrix for getting into channels and start to discuss channel assessment and comparing channels against each other. Another thing I learned during that study is, of course, you can balance out your existing channels, your farmers market and your CSA, with your new channels. And here's just a few ways that the farms I worked with were mixing it up. And what I mean here with produce, excuse me, is that you have your first priority channel. So when there's a limited amount of a certain product, this is the channel that you're going to make sure you supply them and that they're happy. And then once that order is full, all the so-called extra produce can go to these other channels. And there's lots of ways to mix that up. Some people might say, we're only going to wholesale what's left over from or unsold through farmers markets, right? We're going to make sure that those first tomatoes that come off in the beginning of the year are always at our market stall. That's where they are. We have a loyalty to that customer base. They're our first priority. But then as tomatoes really start to come on, then we start wholesaling cases of tomatoes elsewhere. Or flip that and make sure you're satisfying the wholesale customer and only bring the above and beyond produce down to your farm stand or your market. So there's lots of different ways to balance this out, but just to get into this pattern of thinking that I have a first priority channel that I'm always going to make sure I satisfy, and then I'm going to mix in others as it is, right? Because you can show up at the farmer's market without tomatoes. It's okay. All right, and so this methodology is referred to as the market channel assessment tool, and we've done it on around just over 30 farms in the last few years, and I was able to get some stats. So I wanted to show you the kind of earnings that you could expect in these channels and that you could sort of measure yourself up against. So we have the farmers markets up there, and my old assumptions that because they are direct to consumer and because the prices are probably the highest, that it's maybe the best performing channel. But what we found is that if you value the owner's labor, then the rate of gross sales per hour invested in marketing is actually lower than some of the other channels. What this means is that there is a great opportunity in wholesaling. When I say all wholesale there for that rate of $50.88, that's lumping restaurant, grocery store, and distributor sales all into one category. So you can see, this is from something like 32 to 35 farms that have conducted the market channel assessment. So we go to their farm, we monitor labor and sales for 1 week, and then we. In New York, yep. Yeah, and these range, from 2.5 to like 20 acres in production. Farms that are usually primarily using farmers markets, but also doing some wholesale. And like I say, we go in, we measure, we keep logs of all their labor and then gross sales. And I have a longer presentation I sometimes do on this topic, but I wanted to kind of get you right to the end and show you the opportunity that exists in wholesaling, because the return rate in gross sales per hour invested is actually very strong. Of course, CSA was always, from farm to farm, was always the real winner there. And then there's the next column over is the average number of hours invested each week. And then I give you a little more breakdown on farmers markets at the bottom. So, I can answer questions about that at the end, but I wanted to bring some of these numbers in because we're going to talk about getting into wholesale, and I wanted to build up an argument that it's a good option, even though you get the middleman involved, right? Because the distributor is actually very efficient and very good at what they do, and they can probably do it more efficiently than you can on your own. Yeah.
The hours invested, is that man hours?
Yeah, it's all hours. So on some farms they had paid labor, so it's owner labor plus hired labor. In some cases it's just the owners, but yeah, it's everybody's labor. Yes?
What does the end column represent?
Oh, how many farms contribute to that statistic? So we had 58 different farmers markets, not farms, but farmers markets, and then we had 16 CSA farms and so on. All right, so stepping into Baskets to Pallets, wholesaling is really it's not intimidating, and it can be good for your farm, and it's really relying on relationships, and that's we're going to talk about some of the mechanics, but the relationship with the buyer ultimately is what sustains the sales. So I'm going to talk about individual channels like restaurants, grocery stores, and distributors, and give you some of the ins and outs of those channels, and then talk about how to approach them. Restaurants are great because they're probably the most flexible in terms of scale. So where distributors may want larger quantities, and you may be, if you're a really small acreage farm, you might be pressed to meet those. Restaurants can buy much smaller orders, even just ordering things like herbs in bunches instead of cases, right? So as you approach those kind of local foods oriented restaurants that want to have farm names on their menu, you're going to get into probably some nice small orders that you can handle as a beginning wholesaler. Chefs are excited about the product, and you can win new chefs over to local foods by coming in with some great looking stuff and showing them the opportunity and the value in that product. Just talking to a restaurant owner this week who was buying all her scallions at a grocery store, and seasonally she can get them locally. So she was just telling me that it took some some side-by-side comparison at a farmer's market to realize that the grocery store scallions came in small bunches for what the price was, and that she had to cut off so much material and throw it in the compost that the farmer's market or the local option scallions worked out better for her because there was more usable product. And I've heard that about other products as well. So you have, when restaurants start to talk about price, you have some bargaining that you can do there and just point out, we have perhaps higher quality, of course, better flavor, and perhaps more usable product as well for the price. They can really give you some visibility. So if you're interested in having the public find you for your farmer's market or your CSA or your farm stand presence, then getting mentioned on a menu can really get you some mileage and serve as a form of advertising in essence. It's a flexible market. It's quite flexible, and that's where that communication comes in as so valuable. If you're going to come up short for 2 weeks in the middle of the season because of the weather or the timing, and you communicate that with your buyer, and in particular with a restaurant buyer, they're not going to abandon you. They'll wait out the 2 weeks, get it somewhere else, and come back. If you don't communicate that and you just show up one day and you say, man, there are no scallions right now, we have a bad patch or whatever, you're really probably going to burn that relationship. And then some of the downside is that, yes, if you're in an area, as we are in Ithaca, with a lot of small acreage diversified veggie farms, every restaurant you go to has already heard from your 8 best friends. And so it's going to be hard to, get something new in there. Maybe you grow something that other people don't grow or whatever, but it can be difficult if you're in a saturated market. I think when you look around New York State, though, I think maybe Ithaca and a few other towns are maybe a little bit more like that than others. I think there's probably some more room. How about Rochester, Dennis?
Honestly, I haven't.
You haven't knocked on doors.
So I have no idea what the climate's like.
I think there's probably some good opportunities in other cities. And then, yeah, it takes being active, and how many of you like to do cold calls? You do? All right, good for you. They're intimidating, and I actually recommend not doing cold calls. You should always try to contact them in advance and see if you can set up a time that works for them to come in. But cold calling sometimes has just got to happen, and as an extension agent and someone who covers this kind of material in presentations, I love telling people, well, you just got to go knock on doors and you got to talk to people, and but then this summer I had the opportunity to go and do that sort of on other farms' behalf, and it's really intimidating. I've walked in the back of a busy kitchen and tried to catch someone's attention, and if you don't have the stomach for it, it can be hard to do, and I understand that. I think the best thing to do is to try to contact them maybe by phone or whatever and set something up. That way when you come in, hopefully, they're prepared to listen as opposed to being caught in the middle of doing something. I mean, you can imagine your own farm. If you're busy and someone stops in and wants to talk to you for 25 minutes, you might not be willing to really stop, right? So the cold call is a double-edged sword. I'll just give you a little tip that I really like. I don't like to call a place and ask them if they're interested in hearing about local foods, because that gives them a chance to tell me no on the phone. So I ask if I can come in and talk to them, because I think I'll have more success if I can actually get in the place and see them personally. So don't make it easy for them to turn you down on the phone. Just ask if you can come and meet, or if there's a time. And that way they have to say no to your face, which I think will be more challenging. See, get back to me if that works. I want to hear. So here's a quote from a farmer who's here today. The chefs that I can work with as a small to medium-sized producer are the ones who are flexible, who want to try new things, and whose customer base also likes the novelty. So you can imagine the type of restaurant that fits that description and sort it out. I've been having a lot of presentations about meat marketing lately, and what does it mean if a restaurant that you approach thinks your prices are totally ridiculous? What does that mean? It means you're at the wrong restaurant, right? So you got to figure out who suits your marketing. And so this kind of restaurant makes a lot of sense. Walking into any chain restaurant probably is a waste of your time. Well, I can say it almost certainly is, right? And then there are other certain kinds of restaurants where you probably aren't going to get a lot of traction, but they're not the right kind of restaurant for the product that you have. So you're going to want to figure out the ones that sound like the one that she is describing there. All right, so then we can say food hubs, and it's very similar to distributors. So the upside is they can really move a large volume of product. If you have cases and cases, then this is a good channel for you. They usually have their own freight system, including on-farm pickups. Some of them, have slick online systems for listing your availability and so on. They are mission-driven as opposed to being profit-driven, which can really be in your favor. Often they're supported by grants. And they could be a good market for seconds that might go into processing your value-added products as well. The weakness is that you need a large quantity, but do remember that one of the missions of a food hub is usually to do some aggregation. So if they need 8 cases of cucumbers and you have 3, sometimes they're able to pull in another farm and fill that whole order. Of course, this isn't a comment here about consistent quality that's specific to food hubs. It's actually all of the wholesale channels want to see a higher level of washing and sorting than perhaps the CSA, right? I think it's probably the most flexible channel is the CSA. People might like to pick from a variety of sizes. They don't mind if the produce isn't quite as clean. But when it comes to selling to restaurants, distributors, and grocery stores, you're going to have to spend more time grading and sizing and washing. And pack according to the industry standards so that you look like you know what you're doing. And I have a link at the end here that shows you the different packing standards for all the different crops. I find it extremely helpful. All right, hubs are middlemen, which could mean lower prices, but again, the middleman tends to be efficient at what they do and probably has opportunity to be more efficient than you are, especially if they're doing on-farm pickup. Let them drive their trucks, right? You don't have to drive yours. All right, so I have a video here, and hopefully it's going to work.
My name is Stefan Schwartz. I'm the purchasing director here at Headwater Food Hub. My primary responsibility is basically crop planning and coordinating with the farmers on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, and more so now kind of year-to-year basis, and just continually trying to build that network and work with farmers that want to work with us and figure out new ways to get local food to people that want it. So what is a food hub? We've used the word food hub recently to sort of fill in the word or replace the word middleman. And we've now come to the conclusion that we need to embrace the word middleman and that it has such a bad rap, understandably so, but it doesn't need to. We're very transparent, we're very source identified, and we're very flexible in how we run the company. Constantly in conversation with farmers, constantly in conversation with buyers, and really trying to meet everyone in the middle and serve as that hub that makes sense on both ends. So we work with a wide variety of farmers, small, medium, large. All those farms are small in the grand scheme of industrial farming. So appropriately scaled farms for an appropriately scaled food hub. And certainly it's more challenging than just saying that, but it's what drives us in terms of which farms we work with.
My name is Philip Munson from Fisher Hill Farm. We're a family farm. It's my wife and I and our 3 kids. We raise about 25 acres of fresh market vegetables. We do a few strawberries. Our primary marketing is farmers markets. We do wholesale and then the CSAs. We also do poultry, eggs, chicken, and turkey. The farmers markets are probably the majority of our income. In wholesale, it's gaining, but it's still number 2. But it's a nice balance where you could never afford to sell everything wholesale, at least for us with our volume and the labor costs, and then it's really hard to make that profitable. But with a good balance and a good mix, a food hub definitely a really good marketing channel for us. This morning we loaded the truck. We received the order last week. We packed most of it on Wednesday afternoon, had it on pallets in the cooler ready to go, and then we just pushed the pallets in the truck and made a little ride up to Headwater Food Hub. It's nice. We get at least one big order delivery a week, sometimes two in the summertime, and it's all spelled out. We put it on the pallet and it's ready to go. It definitely takes the burden off of what we have to sell at the market. If we have a whole glut of things, sometimes we can move them through Headwater, through the hub. Otherwise, if we had to take it to the market and dump it, it might not be as profitable, or you might not be able to move it. The food hub has helped us market year-round. It's definitely increased our sales. Without the food hub, we would be definitely selling a smaller volume, not storing as much, and I would say maybe we would have incurred as much cost to raise it if we weren't doing it, but for what we did input, it definitely helps us with a lot more income in the wintertime.
For a lot of small farmers, the wholesale world can be a little scary. And this sounds kind of crazy, but we offer a really friendly face. And we offer time and the ability for a farmer to come in and sit down with us, talk about what's working, talk about what's not working, and build out from there. Having someone like us, I think, can help to alleviate some of that.
Any questions about food hubs in particular, or just working with distributors? Yeah.
The wash line was in the food hub, not on his farm?
That's on his farm.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so we'll talk about grocery stores. Again, they're going to be very similar. They can buy a large quantity. I mean, think about this. When it comes to quantity and price, they work in opposite directions, right? So the farmer's market actually demands a relatively small amount of product at a very high price. So it's high price, low volume. And then as you move along into other channels, even CSA, you get a higher and higher volume, but your price is going to fall, right? So grocery stores, distributors can buy a large volume of product at a lower than retail price. Sometimes it takes a little sketch and math to figure out which one you think is going to work out better in that respect. They may source identify, so hopefully they'd be a partner in promotion and put your sign up with your product at the store, on the shelves, and so on. You see some of that at Wegmans and other chains. And they can be a fairly consistent buyer. Again, it's all based on relationships. They have pressure to meet certain numbers in their produce department, and so sometimes that pressure results in them moving away from you. But if you do have a long relationship, you'll find that produce managers will bend to serve you and to keep you. It can be difficult to get in the front door. Like anything, it involves that initial contact and development. We're going to do hopefully we'll have time, we'll do some elevator pitch practice here as an activity. Other downsides are that you're going to, it's not so much a downside as a demand on labor. You're going to have to really do the sizing and grading and washing at a high level, really show that you're a capable professional and that you can deliver the product. Has to look good in terms of cosmetic appearance. Many chains require gaps. There's still enough out there to find wholesalers that don't require gaps and make those sales. But it's sort of coming down the line and increasing among buyers. And then, yeah, they can be much more price sensitive. Unfortunately, because they're shopping really from a global supply, they kind of have an edge on price, and they can get tomatoes from any number of places, right? So they're going to cite that low price when they start bargaining with you, and then you have to make your compelling argument to pay a higher price and get it from you. You can just start looking online, driving around and looking and finding the kinds of individual businesses that make sense for you. I think we're all familiar with web searching for distributors, grocery stores, and restaurants. Here's a thought from Stick and Stone Farm. Chow out at Stick and Stone Farm says, there's so much networking that happens, my contacts would help me connect to buyers and introduce us via email. I think that's really signifying that if you do have any inside line on meeting people, it's always going to be an extra help to you versus the cold call. And it also still reflects the nature of relationships. So we hear it, I've been lucky through the course of my extension career to go on various tours and tour distributors down in the New York City area, in Rochester area, around Ithaca, tour grocery stores, restaurants, and meet all of these buyers. And they all always come back to that message. It's relationship and it's communication. Communication can save the order and the relationship even when things aren't going as planned on the farm. A failure in communication will eventually lead to you losing that customer. Starting off, making the connection, it can be intimidating. You should be talking to determine who the best point of contact is. So make sure you're talking to the right person, and that's something that when you make those phone calls, you might want to ask. A really enthusiastic waiter or waitress still may not be the one who buys the product. So you've got to put your time in with the person who's going to make that decision. And sometimes it's a purchasing person and it's not even the chef when it comes to restaurants and so on. Or sometimes it's the owner, not the chef. So do ask who you should be talking to. Get them on the phone, and yeah, it says preferred method of communication, and that is true. If they really only want to be emailed or texted or whatever, you want to find that out, but you also want to try to get, in my opinion, you want to try to get your own meeting face-to-face with them. So here's a quote, depending on the customer, I'll use email, phone, Facebook Messenger, or text. Yeah, absolutely, everybody has their preference, and whatever works for that customer is what we'll stick to. Doing some research online is a really great idea, and I'm thinking right away we had a buyer from a large New York City company come up to some veggie farms this summer, and you were there, and I took that buyer around to about 6 farms that day, and to be perfectly frank, the first farm we stopped at, he went on their website and he researched them. And when the buyer arrived, he said, oh, I saw you're using carrots in that one dish. Let me show you the carrot field. And I have to say, as the third party who was just there to facilitate, I was so impressed. We went to another farm who just, frankly, they'd never heard of the company. They didn't look them up. And they weren't prepared. They didn't know how to talk about case prices and pallet prices. They really weren't prepared for this opportunity when it came to their door. So take the time and research. Prepare a sales sheet with some information and some pricing. Find out what the company's ideals are, what they're using in their menu or in their store right now or seasonally, and why they might care about buying from you and so on. And do your homework, because you really just come across so strong as a seller when you do that work. Another quote, I'll let you read this one for yourself. Yeah, so once again, a reflection on relationships. Isn't that kid cute? All right, defining expectations. This is part of communication and relationship preservation. Understanding when orders need to be received, when payments need to be received, doing your invoicing on actual invoices. I've purchased local food for special events that we did at our extension office and received like a torn off corner of a piece of paper with a dollar figure on it as an invoice. That's a really hard invoice to pay. Down in Ithaca we have the Piggery. They have their own butcher case, but then they also sell other local foods in their little store. And Heather, the owner, was telling me how she has farms drop off product. She doesn't even know who to mail a check from. Because I go out my back door and there's 4 cases of potatoes. I don't even know who brought them. And I don't know who to pay. So then she's not even not paying. She doesn't know where to mail a check. So come up with an invoicing system. It's very simple, but I went to a 3-hour workshop with Richard Wiswall. And when we drove away, I asked the farms that were in the minivan with me, what was the best thing you learned today? And they said, how to write an invoice. Yeah, it's really basic, but it's obviously it's super valuable. So getting the communication really clear. Some, in particular, the restaurants, they'll have very, very specific instructions about where they want you to put the product when you deliver it, when you can deliver it, and so on. And you would have your specifications as well. Something to think about when you're defining expectations is minimum orders. What's the order size got to be for you to get in a car or truck and drive over to that place? So you should define a minimum order. It's one way to bolster the channel.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
About standing orders, and like, if you know the farms that like require that?
That requires standing orders, that doesn't jump to mind. Certainly the minimum order size is very, very common, and it's a good practice. I don't know of any farms that require standing orders. Yeah, because the nature of our work is so seasonal. I mean, in particular when we're talking about produce, that it's maybe difficult for the farm to get into that relationship. Yeah.
For minimum orders, is it recommended to define it by price or volume?
So she asked for minimum orders, would you do it by price or volume? If you're asking me, in my own opinion, it would be price. So I would just want to make sure it's a $300 threshold or a $50 threshold or whatever it is that I determine, and whatever products make that up, you know, or what makes it up. Something I've experienced with some smaller farms is, you know, you have a lot of controls. I think that as marketers, especially people who are very production oriented and are saddled with marketing, it's easy to think that the market has control and sort of calls the shots for us, but there are controls that we have, and one of them is the order size, and the other one is the pack size. So I remember talking with this farm up in Vermont who was selling arugula, and they were saying, boy, it's been so annoying because we have, well, it wasn't a restaurant, it was an individual consumer, but we have these customers that order a 1/4 pound of arugula, and if it's the only arugula that we got an order for, then we're going out in the field, harvesting and washing this little 1/4 pound and bagging it, and so by the time we do that, there's no way we made any money, right? Well, who's in charge of the pack size for arugula? You are. So you can put on your order sheet, arugula comes in 3-pound bags, right? You can either buy a 3-pound bag or you don't get any in arugula, right? So you have controls that you can institute through price, through pack size, through order minimum, that keep the performance of the channel a little bit more under your control, and you're not always just, you know, sort of victim to the tide of the buyer. Here's another quote from Chow at Stick and Stone, and you know, I see why she put 3 quotes up from him. I worked closely with them when I was starting my market channel project, and you can learn a whole lot working with these guys. So Chow says, the relationship with the wholesale buyer is more about trying to solve the problems of price and logistics. If you can solve those problems, then you can start worrying about whether or not they're going to buy your stuff. If you can't solve those problems, then it's not going to work. And so you can see more about relationships reflected in his comments, as well as you know, kind of identifying the right kind of buyer, right? If price is a non-starter, you're probably at the wrong restaurant or the wrong grocery store. Here's another video. Could you hear the last one? Yeah. Mostly? Yeah, good.
My advice to you is first, understand us. There's been many times where growers would come to me and state, hey, I think we have products that's perfect for you. And then my next question is, well, have you ever been to our stores? And sometimes those growers have never been to our stores. I said, then how would you know who we're servicing and what's the right products that you have? Are you sure you have the right products for us based on what you're seeing in our store? So my advice is obviously go visit us and then look at the products within our department and go back to that point of difference. What is it that you can provide for us that's going to be different than what you're seeing on display? Again, maybe it is location, and if you're closer to then the product that we're providing during that period of time, that's a great point of introduction and interest for us. Or are there, again, different varieties or better quality that you're growing that we just don't have during the time frame of when your product is available? But beyond that, extended season is really important, because if we can stay in stock on your products, that's that much closer than buying something from the West Coast or long distances. There is a benefit to that. Now, we do understand that there's a scalability issue here. I mean, if we're working with large growers in the West Coast, sometimes they can be much more efficient in their operation than what maybe you could. But at the same time, we're not spending the cost to transport that product from the West Coast to here. And you can save us a bit, especially if you're delivering direct to the store. We know there's an expense to that yourself. We factor that into our cost, and usually it's favorable within yourselves to provide that product. So again, having product that's available longer stretches of time can benefit all of us.
I think if you're pursuing opportunities with grocery stores, I think integrity and being upfront with them as to the quality of your product and honesty are all very important. We also have to be somewhat accommodating. If we're scheduled to deliver on a certain day, but they had a sale and they happen to run out of the fruit and they call us and need them earlier, we try to accommodate that. And sometimes it is hard, but it is important. They are a customer, and as much as we all try to be proactive with things, we need to sell our product. So I think being somewhat reasonable and accommodating is important as well.
All right, just a few more slides, and hopefully we'll have time for questions or an activity. Yeah, your wholesale customers, hopefully they will also be partners in promotion, putting your farm name out on their menus and store shelves, and even the distributors, they are going to in turn create order sheets for their clients, restaurants and such, and they can carry your farm name through, hopefully all the way to the end consumer. You might have to help with some of this by providing your signage or your story or anything that they're looking for. Maybe it's a little postcard or rack card that goes out on the shelf and so on. So we're going to talk about the sell sheet, and I have some examples up here that you can look at, and I considered maybe passing them around and doing a little activity. The sheet is going to have certain basic pieces of information, and the idea is that you'll break into little groups and look at them, and then see if you can identify the different sort of ingredients that always need to be in the mix. And it's funny, as I looked through these sheets in preparation for this, something that struck me is that price isn't always one of those ingredients, because prices can change through your season and through your production. And even, perhaps for a beer company, maybe their pricing shifts every few months, so they might put out a sheet without price, and that's not an error, that's just giving information about the product and then letting the price sheet come, weekly or something like that. So it's early in the morning, I'm not a morning person, but are you guys willing to break into 10 groups? Can I get 10 little clusters, and I'll come hand out some sheets for you to review and look for the sort of ingredients? Or is that kosher? Or we can do this elevator pitch, which might be even more fun. Come on, give me some sign that you can hear me. Elevator pitch? Studying the sheets. Elevator pitch. All right, moving on. An elevator pitch. When you do walk into the back of a busy restaurant, because inevitably it'll happen, and you cold call them, you're going to want to explain yourself very quickly and very clearly. So I have some sheets here that I'll hand out, and I'm just going to ask you to work on the questions, and then you can practice your elevator speech on each other. So I'm just going to set the mic down and come and hand out these sheets. Again, I think I have 29 copies, so there may be some need to work as a group. All right, in the interest of time, I'll bring us back together for just a quick minute. Thanks. I hope that you got something out of that. You got to practice your elevator pitch. Maybe you learned something from the people sitting around you. So again, in the interest of time, I won't do the sales sheet activity where you review them, but they're up here, and I don't need to bring them back with me. So if you want to just take one, I think there was 9. You can take one back and just kind of see how other people are doing it in terms of providing sheets to those buyers. I just wanted to talk about one more thing that's particular to vegetables that I've always found to be extremely useful, and that's this packing guide that's coming out of Pennsylvania. The link to it seems to move around all the time. It's always a broken link, so I can't share a link, but I can just give you the name, and then you can do searches and find it online. This gives you the sort of professional level packing instructions that you would need to know. I remember talking to a New York City distributor who said they ordered a bunch of cauliflower from a farm in the Hudson Valley, and it was delivered in black Hefty bags. That's not going to be acceptable to most of your wholesale, well, probably all of your wholesale buyers. And I thought, I'm in the Finger Lakes, so I thought, well, we can do better than Hefty bags. So we'll get this sheet and we'll look at it. So just look at, if you can't see it because it's fine print here, it says broccoli. Head should be tight with dark green or purple buds. Pack 10, 12, 14, 16, or 18 in a 1 1/9 bushel box. Weight should be 23 pounds. Leave 6 inches of stem on, should be iced. So it's telling you how to sort, how to grade, and how to cool and how to pack. So it's really a handy guide. It's 2 or 3 pages long. It's funny that apples are not on there, but many, many crops are. And you can always refer to this so that when someone orders a case of something from you, you know what they're imagining and you can deliver. So hopefully you got a picture of that or you wrote it down. And I also wanted to mention on the Cornell Small Farms website is this resource called Guide to Marketing Channel Selection, How to Sell Through Wholesale and Direct Marketing Channels, and it has some of the points that we've discussed, the pros and cons, and then some advice and tips on approaching buyers. So I'll leave it with that. Are there any questions? All right, so if you want to grab one of these sheets, come on up, and otherwise, thanks for coming to this session. I think there's an evaluation form in the back. If you care to fill one out, we'd appreciate that. Yeah.